If you have a true scary story that you'd like to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so, or email it to me at astheravendreams@gmail.com. And of course, thank you. This is something that happened to my twin sister and I when we got our first place together at the age of 20. We'd been living at home, neither of us quite set on what we wanted to go to college for, if at all, so we just focused on working. After saving up enough, we got an apartment together for a decent price. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. It was in an older building, but it was our first place that we got all on our own, so we were proud of it. Our landlord, Dawn, not only owned the building, but lived in one of the apartments as well on the top floor. We had to supply bank statements to show that we could afford the rent, pay a deposit and 2 months of rent, but we also didn't have to apply or do any kind of credit pulling, so we were pretty happy about that. Dawn seemed like a pretty normal guy, maybe in his late 40s. He was professional enough, going over the rules, what was allowed, what was not. He explained if there were any maintenance issues to just call or come tell him and he would take care of it. He did the walkthrough with us, making sure the place looked fine and that nothing needed to be fixed immediately. As we worked on the process in the walkthrough, he asked about us, about where we worked, what we did for fun, if we planned on having any friends over or pets. At the time, it just seemed like normal questions to learn about the tenants, so we answered them honestly. At the time, we just had 2 parakeets, so nothing that would make a mess in the apartment. As for friends, we did plan on having some over, but nothing long term. About 2 months after we moved in, we started noticing small things that felt off. I would come home and feel like things had slightly moved. Not obviously ransacked or anything, just different. I was pretty specific with how I leave things. My drawers were always completely pushed in. When they're slightly ajar or crooked, it would drive me crazy. And same with chairs. Even if I was just getting up for a second, I would push it all the way in. So when I came home and went to my room and noticed that my drawer was slightly off, I knew that it had been moved. The drawer in particular had my bras in it, and I asked my sister if she had borrowed one and she said no. I thought it was weird, but it didn't look like I was missing any, so I assumed maybe it was just a one-off chance that I didn't realize I didn't push it all the way in. To be honest, I didn't believe that, but I had no other explanation. But when it kept happening, but to areas like the bathroom or the living room, I started wondering if it was maintenance. There were a few things that we had reported. The sliding door didn't seem to lock properly, and the dryer started making a loud noise. Well, at this point the dryer wasn't quite as loud, but the door still wasn't locking, so I kind of just assumed that maybe maintenance had come in for the dryer. However, they weren't supposed to enter when we weren't home. And since our stuff was obviously being moved around, I had a big problem with it. So, I went to Dawn's unit to complain about it. I didn't want us to be pushed around just because we were younger, so I was ready to put a stop to it immediately. I knocked on his door and he answered in a pair of sweatpants and no shirt. He looked surprised to see me. I explained that I noticed things being moved around in our apartment that neither I nor my sister had moved. I tried to keep my tone polite but firm, explaining that I know the rules and I know that maintenance could not enter without us home, and that they also had to give us a 24-hour notice. I remember how Dawn's face did this weird thing where he looked almost panicked for a second. Then when I mentioned maintenance, he overcorrected into being super apologetic and understanding. He said that he would look into it and make sure that it didn't happen again. It seemed like he did talk to them because the weird moving of objects stopped for a while, and my sister also never saw anything out of place. Fast forward a bit, my sister talked about a nightmare she had and worries about sleep paralysis. She mentioned how she was locked in a room with a slit in the door that slid open and shut. When the slit opened, she could see a pair of eyes staring at her, but she couldn't do anything about it. She tried to scream, but she couldn't. She tried to move or hide under the covers, but she couldn't. She never had issues with sleep paralysis before, and I know those nightmares could happen. I'd had them before as a kid, but that was just it. Neither of us had had a nightmare to that degree since we were kids. It was pretty crazy, but we both agreed that maybe she was just stressed at something weird, and we moved on. And that is, until I woke up one night needing to use the restroom. I was in one of those positions where you know you will not get that comfortable if you get up, but my bladder was shouting at me. I rolled over to face the door, and as my eyes focused, my heart dropped. My door was cracked open, something I didn't do, and it looked like someone was standing there watching me. I lied there for several seconds, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Was this real? Was I dreaming? I didn't know how to react, not wanting to get out of bed, so I just said out loud, "Sis, what are you doing?" And that's when I almost peed myself. The figure slowly backed away. I quickly sat up, trying to grasp if what I just saw was real. I got up, turned on my light, and slowly opened my door and looked down the hallway. My sister and I are both pretty small, so if this was an intruder, there was no way I could take them. I was afraid to rush out there and confront them, but was hoping that I was sleepwalking or just imagining it. But I was not feeling confident in that, though. After a few seconds, I opened the door all the way and looked down the hall towards our kitchen and dining room. I didn't see anyone, so I quickly opened my sister's door across from me and saw her asleep in her bed. I woke her up and told her what I just saw, and she quickly sat up, now fully awake. We called the police and reported it. The slider still wasn't fixed at that point, but the balcony didn't go anywhere and we were on the second floor. And to no surprise to anyone, there were no ladders or ropes leading to the bottom, meaning the person had to have come from our front door, of which I was certain we locked. The police asked the normal questions, and since they didn't see anyone around and didn't catch anyone, they left, and we were unable to fall back asleep. It was crazy to us. We didn't have a lot of stuff, as we were just going alone and getting stuff as we had the money for it. Everything else, like our couch and TV, were clearly older, as they were brought from our parents' place. But since nothing was missing or even searched through, it seemed like robbing us was not their intention, which I felt even more creeped out about. The next day, my sister and I went to talk to Don about what happened. I remember him being completely shocked about it, and made a comment that he had never had reports like that until we moved in. It wasn't until we left that I realized what he said. We told him that we wanted to better secure the apartment and mentioned getting a doorbell camera, and he was apprehensive. We explained that we would be paying for it and installing it ourselves, so there was no cost to him. But he said he didn't want those installed on the doors because it invaded people's privacy. I argued that it wouldn't because it's on our door and would only catch people walking by it or stopping at our door. I even reminded him that someone broke into our apartment, so we were trying to catch the person that did it, making his apartment complex safer. But no matter what, he refused. He gave a half-assed apology but said that he wouldn't allow anything on the outside of the building, and also felt that it was appropriate to say any damage done to the apartment would come out of our deposit if and when we moved out. We left feeling defeated and like he definitely wouldn't do anything for us if it came down to it. We were barely 6 months into our lease, and already we were getting some really bad feelings from it all. We did tell our parents about everything that happened, and they both agreed that they didn't like his response to it. My dad understood him not wanting things installed on the outside of the building, but said that there were other ways he could have handled it. He mentioned using a magnetic plate to put it on the door, that way nothing had to be installed, no holes being made. But they both didn't like how he didn't seem concerned about the break-ins in general. That's when my sister pointed out the way he said that it didn't happen until we moved in. Like it was our fault. So my dad helped us with a way around it. We went and picked up 2 cameras and had them set up to face both of our doors. One was on the bookshelf facing the front door, and the other was on the entertainment center facing the slider, just in case. This way it just captured the doors, so it wasn't too intrusive for us, and if someone broke in, we would have even better proof that they were inside our apartment. I know setting up the cameras didn't really secure us any better, but it at least gave me a little more fire, knowing that we would have proof. We both just made sure the doors were locked at all times, the slider being fixed at this point, so there was no doubt that it was left unlocked. Things went back to normal after that, and we started to relax for a bit. We didn't feel quite as uncomfortable being home at night, and our dad called or texted us goodnight every night, making sure we were okay. Then, it all came to a head about 2 weeks later. We were both asleep, and I once again had the urge to use the restroom. I rolled over and noticed that once again, my door was slightly open. But this time there was no figure in the doorway. I did, however, immediately sit up, knowing that I didn't leave my door like that, and was worried that someone came in again. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 ready to call, as I slowly stood up and walked the few steps to my door. I swung my door open quickly, and to my horror, there was a guy facing my sister's room with her door open, and his pants were down. I know that he heard me swing the door, because he started to whip around as he tried to pull his pants up. But my scream is what woke up my sister. She turned so quickly, covering herself up, as she was sleeping in just a t-shirt. I was so angry and freaked out at once. I wanted to just lock myself in my sister's room and call the police, but the anger took over when I recognized the intruder. And you probably guessed at this point, it was Dawn. I grabbed the first thing within my reach, which was a boot on this shelf that sat between our rooms, and I threw it at him. And then, I kept throwing shoes at him until I ran out and finally got up and left our apartment. My sister was on the phone with the cops while we waited for them to show up. I checked our cameras. It clearly showed him entering our apartment through the front door, pulling down his hood, and looking around the apartment. He then walked down the hallway where he was out of view until it showed him crawling across the floor, ducking my shoes. He'd been there for about 20 minutes. I was horrified and disgusted. No wonder he didn't want us to install a camera. He had a key to the place, so he could come and go as he pleased, and the camera would just show him doing as much. He clearly wasn't expecting us to have cameras inside the apartment based on his conversation with the police. When they arrived, we told them everything, and then showed them the camera footage. They went to confront him, and he had completely changed his clothes and denied everything, claiming we had caused nothing but trouble since we moved in. He actually told them that we were probably doing it because we had tried flirting with him to lower our rent. But when they told him that we had video proof it was him, he shut up and wouldn't say another word. There was a whole legal thing after all this, which is why I didn't use any real names, just in case. He still tried to argue that we had to pay to get out of our lease, but that didn't go as he planned. He was charged for basically breaking and entering, among some other charges. We moved out pretty quickly after that, even though he wasn't around. We still didn't feel comfortable being there. So, back to our parents' place we went. At least until we figured it all out again. The next place we got, we vetted it much better, and we went through a company rather than a single person. And we still had our cameras up too, because now, I just find it hard to trust people. Every once in a while, a case comes along that really makes a person scratch their head, and this is definitely one of those cases. This case may also make you very, very angry for how it was handled in the immediate aftermath. So, there's a trigger warning for everyone there because it honestly made me so angry that I had to walk away from writing this for a few days. For multiple reasons, this is one of the cases that really stands out, especially once you begin digging into it. The Moore case, or as it's also called, the Villisca axe murder case, has many layers. A lot of intrigue, and it's one of those cases that, to me, absolutely reeks of a cover-up. Granted, that is just that's Tom K's opinion, based on the degree of difficulty I had finding details about a lot of this. But let's go ahead and get into this case, and then you, my lovely listeners, can as usual draw your own conclusion based on the information. Josiah Moore, 43, was a local affluent businessman that owned a John Deere franchise. His wife, Sarah Moore, 39, played the piano at their church and helped organize the Children's Day program there as well. They had 4 children: Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5. Pretty idyllic family for the times. Josiah and Sarah were married in 1899, and in 1903 they moved into the home where they would be spending the rest of their lives. Although, that was certainly cut a lot shorter than they could have anticipated. On Sunday, June 9th, 1912, Mary Catherine had invited Ina May, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12, to spend the night, and that evening they joined the Moore family at the Presbyterian Church. Services ended at 9:30 p.m. and the girls walked home to the Moore residence, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. That was the last time that any of the Moores or the Stillinger girls were seen alive. The next morning on June 10th, the Moores' neighbor, Mary Peckham, became concerned when she noticed that they had not been outside to take care of their usual morning chores. She went to the Moores' house and knocked on the door. After receiving no answer, she went and let their chickens out and then called Josiah's brother Ross to come and check on the family. Once he arrived, he too received no answer to his knocks or when he called out. Since he got no answer, Ross used his copy of the house key to let himself inside the home. Once inside, he opened the door to the downstairs guest bedroom, and he found the Stillinger sisters' bodies lying on the bed. He quickly exited the house and asked Peckham to go and call the local peace officer, Henry Horton. What Horton would find was absolutely horrific. In addition to the Stillinger girls, he found the entire Moore family had been bludgeoned to death with an axe that belonged to Josiah. The axe itself was recovered from the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were found. Doctors who examined the bodies of the victims concluded that the murders had happened any time between midnight and 2 a.m. The butts of 2 cigarettes were found in the attic, which suggested that the killer had waited patiently. This is a bit of speculation on my part, but I think the killer had gotten into the home while they were at the church, and they waited for this opportunity. But again, that is just the author's personal speculation. The massacre began in the master bedroom, where Sarah and Josiah were sleeping. Josiah received the most brutal treatment. He'd been hacked with the sharp side of the axe, and his face was so mangled that his eyes had been completely destroyed. Investigators also found a gouge mark in the ceiling where the killer had raised the axe over their head to strike. I found some conflicting reports that the sharp side of the axe was used on Sarah or that she was bludgeoned. The children all suffered head trauma from the blunt side of the axe as they slept, except Lena Stillinger, who had defensive wounds on one of her arms, suggesting that she had tried to fight back. And here is something truly bizarre. After killing the sisters, the killer went back up to the master bedroom to inflict more wounds on Sarah and Josiah. Afterwards, they placed the axe in the guest room and left a 4-pound slab of raw bacon next to the weapon. From here, they also did some vulgar positioning to Ida and then left her. Let's just say exposed. Initially, investigators thought that the killer had at least tried to assault her, but there was never any further proof to back that claim up. Some other very strange things were also discovered in the aftermath, such as untouched food in a blood-covered glass, which were found in the kitchen. Every mirror in the home had been covered with blankets or clothing, whatever could be used as a covering, and things don't stop getting weird here. In an act that today we would find completely strange, unthinkable, and unacceptable, people from the town flocked to the house and were allowed to traipse around the crime scene, completely contaminating things. One of the most morbid and quite frankly sickening acts was that people completely disrespected the Moore family home and the crime scene and took pieces of Josiah's skull as souvenirs. In my personal opinion, this was nearly as grotesque as the crime itself. And if not grotesque, it definitely falls into the category of being in poor taste, to say the absolute least. I mean, who the heck does something like that? But I digress. Hundreds of people handled the murder weapon. It took hours before the sheriff was able to gain complete control of the crime scene. When the county coroner, one Dr. Lindquist, arrived around 9 a.m., he first examined the crime scene himself and then met with Horton and the sheriff to go over all the information they had gathered. Dr. Lindquist was very unhappy with the constant stream of townspeople parading through the crime scene and urged the sheriff to call in the National Guard to help secure the scene. By 10:30, the guard was on site, securing the scene. A local druggist whose hobby was photography showed up and took pictures of the crime scene, but the photos were considered too ghoulish, and he was later dismissed. Most people speculate that his actions were completely financially driven, as many drugstores would sell postcards with pictures from crime scenes emblazoned on them at the time. Something else completely unthinkable in our modern times. As more details began to be uncovered, people began to question how a killer could have maneuvered and moved about a cramped, creaky farmhouse without being detected. This led to speculation that the killer had spiked milk or cocoa the family had drunk with a sedative of some kind. However, toxicology tests were not a routine part of autopsies back then, so this was never confirmed. The police did put together a list of suspects, including Frank Jones and Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was an English-born minister that traveled about peddling religion like a snake oil salesman in one town after another. On many occasions, he'd been accused of peeping and asking young girls to pose nude for him. Ultimately, he was tried twice, with the first trial ending in a hung jury. Kelly had confessed to the killings during trial, but the jury did not believe his confession, and he was ultimately never convicted of the crime. There really is not a whole lot more I can go into on this case, as, to this day, it is unsolved, and no one has ever been able to definitively prove who was responsible for the murders, and no motive has been established. I do think, based on some of the vulgar details, including Ida Stillinger's body, that Reverend Kelly is a very likely suspect given his history of inappropriate behavior. But with the brutality that was inflicted upon Josiah, you can't rule out Frank Jones having something to do with it based on the past business dealings between him and Josiah. There are also legends that the house is haunted, but I'm not going to go into that here, as that would be a write-up for another episode that perhaps we could get into in a Strange Things of Iowa episode. Now, as always, we're going to reiterate the names of the victims of this savage crime, as each one of them, as always, deserves to be remembered as a human being and not just some spectacle for people to gawk at. Josiah Moore, 43, Sarah Moore, 39, Herman Montgomery Moore, 11, Mary Catherine Moore, 10, Arthur Bloyd Moore, 7, Paul Vernon Moore, 5, Ina Mae Stillinger, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 12. May they rest in peace. Hey Raven, I definitely owed you this story a long time ago since it happened to my wife about a month ago at this point. I mentioned it on one of your community night streams. I apologize for the delay, but hopefully the story I'm about to tell you makes it worth the wait. As always, this is a true story. My wife will often drive for Spark, which is a service through Walmart that allows you to shop, pick up, and deliver groceries to customers. While doing this, she experiences various odd and unusual situations all the time. to the point that we have our own countermeasures to make sure she's safe. We have an app that allows us to track our phones, codes and protocols to alert each other of any situations that we might have, and it definitely pays off. It was a late evening, heading towards that dusk look where the sun is still in the sky, but it was still dark, and my wife had initially called me to let me know she was wrapping up a batch order that had about 15 stops on it. Something she was used to having and didn't mind since they paid more. And she was ready to come home after this last stop, which took her about 30 minutes away into a rural tree-filled area. She was telling me about how the houses were all spaced out and hidden in thick tree-filled land, and after some banter between us both, she told me that she would call me back, because she was about to be at her final stop. We ended our conversation, and I was about to finish working on the computer when she immediately called back almost 30 seconds later. "Ping me, right now," she demanded, which is usually what we say when we want a screenshot of our location from the tracking app in case of an emergency. I asked her what was going on, and she told me that when she arrived on the property, the front mailbox had animal skulls, candles, and odd symbols all over it. And just past it was a long, narrow dirt driveway cutting through thick, tall trees. My wife said the GPS indicated the mailbox was a mile out from the actual house, and she felt uneasy having to travel all the way down this creepy driveway. I told her that I would stay on the phone, and she said that her dash cam was still going, as well as her body cam. As I said before, we have plenty of countermeasures for when we drive for delivery services because a lot of crazy things happen to delivery drivers and couriers in this field of work. And most services leave us to fend for ourselves and only care about completed deliveries, and not being liable for anything else. Anyways, as she drove down the driveway, she was narrating what she saw, mentioning how the darkness from the towering trees made her feel like something dark was creeping all around her, and apparently a few of the trees had carved symbols on them, and finally, more animal skulls. As she approached the end of the driveway, she said that something smelled like a dead animal, and as she approached the end, the smell got stronger. The actual house was a large structure with black roofing and black wooden walls, and it seemed to be old, run down, and somewhat abandoned. The 3 cars parked near the house were fairly new-looking, so we knew that someone lived there, and my wife told me that she had a note to leave the groceries behind the carport, which she didn't notice initially, but sure enough, to the right of the run-down house was an equally decrepit and worn-out carport, which, ironically, none of the cars were parked under. My wife said that once she opened her door, the stench of whatever had died made the air thick and unbearable to breathe, but nonetheless, she began hauling the groceries under the carport, and she mentioned to me that no one had come out of the house or even acknowledged that she had arrived. But she actually interrupted herself with a few swear words, and then told me that she was getting the hell out of here right now. To which I, of course, asked her, "What happened? Are you okay?" And I wasn't expecting her to say what she said next. "There's nooses in the carport. It's not a prop, and it's not fake. It's real rope. One of them is right above me, and it looks like something big is hanging from one of them further back," she told me. As she placed the last few things from the grocery order at the carport, she also mentioned to me that there was some weird giant symbol that looked like it was burned or painted into the floor of the carport, and that whatever smelled horrible seemed to be stronger in the carport. The sun was starting to set more, and the darkness around her wasn't helping how terrifying the entire ordeal was. She quickly went back to her car and glanced at the front of the house, once more on reflex. When she first arrived, no one had come out of the house, or was on the porch, or even in the yard. My wife makes a point to greet any customers that come out of the house or approach when she arrives, but again, no one was originally there. When my wife looked back this time, she said that a man with a full, long beard was standing there, wearing black pants and what she described as a black hoodie or cloak. He stared at her with a dark scowl, and his hands were clasped together in front of him, as if he were casually waiting for someone to arrive. She told me how cold she felt when she saw him standing there, and she immediately began turning her car around to leave. This is where things got weird, because as she did this, the man made his way down from the porch of the house and began walking quickly toward her car. My wife peeled out while I was on the phone with her, saying choice words the entire time. And once she got far enough down the long driveway, she calmed down a bit and told me that she was going to report the location as unsafe. She archived the dashcam footage of the location for an investigation, and a week later, my wife received an email response to her report to Spark customer service that stated that the customer was since removed from the Spark platform. So, there you have it. The story about the cursed driveway. She showed me footage from the dashcam, but will not allow me to upload it. But I will say this. Since her car was facing the front of the house, the dashcam recorded the porch and part of the carport. When she runs back to the car after seeing the nooses, the man that she saw on the porch didn't appear on the camera until she glances over. And he literally just appears. He didn't open the door or emerge from somewhere off camera at all. He just literally appeared on the porch. I know there will always be naysayers and even some trolls who insist that everything is made up or fake. But honestly, from how my wife felt when she came home and how terrified she was when everything was happening, I know this wasn't fake. Both of us have experienced some scary, unhinged, and flat-out wild situations while she's driving for Spark, and I'm driving for DoorDash. I wish the animal skulls that she saw in the mailbox and tree were fake, but we have an eerie feeling they weren't. And we don't think that someone would go out of their way to set up an elaborate stage just to scare some random delivery driver. Some things that happen in life, as all of us in Raven's flock know well, aren't always able to be explained away. And it doesn't make us crazy or unhinged because we experience them. In the end, I'm just glad that my wife is okay. College is a huge time in the lives of those fortunate enough to attend it. For a lot of people, it's their first time out on their own in the world. They make friends, build bonds, and begin finding out just who they are and what their role in the world is going to be. Many people think of their college years as some of the best and happiest of their lives. Still young enough to be carefree and uninhibited, but just mature enough to handle their responsibilities. Well, in some cases, not so much. Sadly, that was not the case for 4 young University of Idaho students. For them, things would have a far more tragic end. Madison Maddie Mogan and Kaylee Gonçalves had grown up together and had been best friends since their childhood. They had rented an off-campus home with 3 other female students, Xana Kernodle, Dylan Mortensen, and Bethany Funk. The 21-year-old Maddie was a marketing major and holding down a part-time job at a restaurant called the Mad Greek. Kaylee, also 21, was majoring in general studies and was set to graduate a semester early the following month, with a job lined up with an IT company in Dallas. Xana, age 20, was majoring in marketing and also worked at the Mad Greek alongside Maddie. Ethan Chapin, 20, was majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management. He was also a triplet and was the boyfriend of Xana. For these 4 young people, tragedy would strike on November 22nd, 2022. All 5 of the housemates were in the house by 2 a.m., plus Xana's boyfriend. At 4 a.m., Xana received a DoorDash order, and at 4:12 a.m., she was on TikTok, which suggests that she was awake when the intruder made his presence known. This also gives us a bit of a timeline because police suspect that the 4 murders occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. The closest we have to any kind of first-hand account is from Dylan Mortensen. Dylan says that she had been asleep in her room on the 2nd floor when she was awoken by loud noises from the 3rd floor. Dylan explained to the police that she had initially thought it was just Kaylee and her dog making noise. A bit later on, she said that she heard someone saying something and she thought it was Kaylee saying something like, "There's someone here." But when she looked out her door into the hallway, she saw nothing and nobody. Minutes later, she heard what sounded like someone crying from Xana's room. Upon opening her door, again, Dylan heard an unfamiliar male voice say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Opening the door a third time, she saw the intruder clad in black and wearing a mask that covered his mouth. The unknown man was walking toward her, and Dylan said she froze in fear as he got closer. To her surprise, he walked right past her and exited out a sliding door located in the kitchen. Dylan later told detectives that she did not call 911 right away because she was intoxicated and in denial. At 4:26, Dylan left her room and joined their other roommate, Bethany. She saw Xana lying face down on the floor in her room, and Dylan said she thought she was just intoxicated. When they still had not heard from their housemates the next morning, they called other friends over to help. And shortly after arriving, one of the friends found Ethan and Xana in her room. Neither of them had a pulse. He ushered the other ones out of the house, and Bethany called 911. By that afternoon, all 4 students had been declared dead, and the crime was brutal. Kaylee was stabbed more than 20 times, as well as injuries that suggested blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. Xana had more than 50 stab wounds. Many of them were defensive wounds, which means the young woman put up one hell of a fight for her life. Around the time of the murders, security cameras showed a white or light-colored Hyundai Elantra in the area. Investigators noted that it made multiple passes of the neighborhood the victims lived in, and this led them to begin sifting through over 22,000 records of owners of Hyundai Elantras manufactured between 2011 and 2013. Another surveillance camera caught the same vehicle past the victim's house 3 times, beginning around 3:30 a.m. At 4:06, the car returned a 4th time, and by 4:20, the car was seen speeding away from the area. Now, unfortunately, I have to say the name of the person that was convicted of these atrocious crimes. And yes, even speaking it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. This led police in nearby Pullman, Washington, a nearby college town, to begin investigating 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohberger, who was attending Washington State University as a PhD student and teaching assistant. Kohberger had quite the list of academic accomplishments and had several degrees, including a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in criminal justice. Part of how they decided Kohberger was a person of interest in the crime was how often his cell phone had been pinging the cell tower closest to the home of the 4 victims, over a dozen times in the months before the crime. When the police recovered a knife sheath from Maddie's bed that had traces of male DNA on it, initially the police were working with the forensic genealogy company Othram, but by December 10th, when potential relatives to the suspect declined to speak with Othram or authorities, the FBI stopped working with the company and took over the investigation themselves. They then immediately turned over to the companies MyHeritage and GED Match. These companies had the DNA of people who had not opted into being part of the law enforcement search databanks, and the police began to pull from that pool despite it being a Justice Department decree that law enforcement only use DNA from databases that provide explicit notice to the users that law enforcement may use the services of their site. Despite the incredibly moral gray area, this did prove to be a windfall for the case. As in previous searches through Othram, they had only found people that shared 70.7 centimorgans of DNA, which is said to be the equivalent of sharing a great-great-grandparent. But once they started using the other databases, regardless of legality, they found a match that shared 250 centimorgans of DNA. This, of course, meant that they had found a much, much closer relative. Within days of this, the police had Kohberger's parents' home under surveillance. It was during this surveillance that police noticed Kohberger wearing surgical gloves and placing numerous bags of trash into his neighbor's bin. They also witnessed him cleaning the car inside and out, not missing an inch of area. Objects from the trash bins were sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. After a search of the home, investigators found a knife, pistol, and a face mask, as well as ID cards inside a glove in a box. Finally, on December 30th, Kohberger was arrested by police while at his parents' home. Once the legal proceedings began, the defense lawyer for Kohberger stated that his client had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, although the judge stated that he had witnessed no odd behavior and that Kohberger gave all signs of being high-functioning. The judge prohibited the jury from hearing any testimony on an autism diagnosis unless Kohberger himself took the stand. On January 3rd, 2023, Kohberger agreed to be extradited back to Idaho. While he was in jail in his home state of Pennsylvania, he had been held without bail, and once sent back to Moscow, Idaho, he was again held without bail. After months of legal proceedings in May of 2023, when Kohberger appeared in court, he refused to offer any sort of plea, and the judge entered a not guilty plea for him. On September 9th, 2024, Kohberger was granted a change of venue and transferred to Ada County for the trial. On June 30th, 2025, Kohberger agreed to a plea deal in which he pled guilty to all 5 felony charges leveled against him. That's 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. He would also give up the rights to all appeals, which would mean that he would be in prison until the day he dies. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm really tired of saying this guy's name, so we're going to move on to the closing of this one by once again remembering the victims of this monster's carnage. 4 young people who most certainly did not earn such a horrific end. Madison Maddie Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonçalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20. May they rest in peace. So that, my friends, was a collection of some terrifying, disturbing horror stories. 2 of them being write-ups by Tom, which, of course, as always, thank you, Mr. Tom. And then 2 of them being submitted stories, one by Fox, one by another person. Definitely creepy stories, in my opinion. I don't really know how to wrap this up, other than saying, these are disturbing and creepy, and I'm glad I've never dealt with anything like this. And also, Fox, I'm very glad that your wife is safe too, because I'm going to be honest with you. I know some of the things that you've mentioned about where you live from the streams and from other stories, and with a vague understanding of how things are there, I would not have been as brave as your wife, I will say that. I would have not gone down that driveway. I would have left the groceries on the mailbox, called, and said, hey, go get your stuff. But also, and this is, again, this is not in being dismissive of the situation in any way, shape, or form. It's just an idea that popped in my head while I was reading that story. What kind of satanistic cult stuff is going on in those woods? Part 1 of that thought. Part 2, what kind of satanistic cult orders deliveries from Walmart? But you know what? As I think about that, and yes, I did pause there to redo this, or to kind of continue on this thought. As I think about that more after I said it, of course they would, right? It's just easier. It's convenience. And even disturbing, horrifying, satanistic cults that live in the woods, need convenience. So, kudos to them? I don't know. Anyways. Thank you for submitting your stories, guys, and thank you, Tom, for the 2 write-ups. I do appreciate you, and thank you, listener, for listening to this point. You're amazing for doing so. Hope you know that. If you did listen to this point, please consider hitting that like button. That'd be tremendous. I'd really appreciate it. It helps the video grow. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new and liked what you heard and want more content like this. I post at least 3 times a week. I've been doing daily content for the past month, which actually comes to an end next Monday. So, only because the Sundays and Mondays videos are normal. So, after this upcoming Monday, that daily content's over. Going back to 3 a week. 3 a month. Wow, that'd be terrible. 3 a week. So, yeah. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know. The other thing you can do is leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the stories, or how you're doing, anything you want to comment. You can also join Patreon or memberships, the join button down below the video, to get early access to content like this. I plan on keeping things up as far as being early goes. I'm going to do my best. We'll see how it goes. And other things, depending on which sign up for. You can also go to the website astheravendreams.com, where you can, 1, submit your story, 2, find all my social media platforms, and 3, find all the platforms where my podcast is available in longer format. Cool. Other than that, just keep being amazing. And remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best that you can be. Don't forget it, and don't anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.